Ambassador Scotta, the brother of Onegassa, says in Greek, "We also ask for the reimbursement of our expenses for the military operation against your empire." Astonished, the great eunuch Chrysaphius, prime minister of the Eastern Roman Empire, looks at him. What? It is the Hun army that occupies an important part of the territory of our empire. It is our cities that are destroyed, and not your lands, and you ask that we pay you the repairs. The ambassador of Attila quietly explains. This war was provoked by the necessity of putting an end to the violations of the conditions of Margum's peace, which continued despite the repeated protests on our part. The Huns did not want war and were forced to face many difficulties. It is natural that the guilty party should reimburse moral and economic harm. The Grand Eunuch does not dispute this assertion and is interested. How many do you want? 6,000 pounds of gold. It's a lot. Scotta smirks ironically. Your Empress Eudoxia has spent much more on her journey to Jerusalem. Conciliatingly, Chrysaphius says, "Okay, let's not argue. The conditions of Margum's peace must now be changed. The annual tribute must increase 3 times and make 2,100 pounds of gold." It's a lot. The ambassador is angry. I do not have the power to argue. I have the instructions to interrupt negotiations if you disagree. Then our generals will begin the offensive on Constantinople. Okay, what else? The compensation for each Roman fugitive will henceforth be 12 pieces of gold instead of 8. But territorial questions. They will be examined only after the fulfillment of these conditions. Theodosius signs the agreement with these conditions. Chrysaphius hoped to win over this affair, having put some of the money collected for the payment of repairs in his pocket. But 2 months later Scotta again appears with the Huns' accountants. In agreement with the Emperor Theodosius, they control the entry of the repairs. They first impose the wealthiest, senators, knights, merchants and bankers. The poor and ecclesiastics are exonerated. Chrysaphius, initially a domestic of Pulcheria, had the skill of pleasing her competitor Eudoxie, turned around Theodosius. He organized the murder of his predecessor and bought for a large sum of money the key position of the emperor's armiger. In 443, he became prime minister and the nearest advisor to the emperor. He even succeeded in removing Pulcheria a little from power and thus becoming the most powerful personality of the empire. At the beginning of 449, Orestes and Edecon arrive at Constantinople as ambassadors of Attila. They hand over to the Emperor Theodosius the letter of Attila with the following requirements: the fixing of the new frontier at a distance of 5 days' march from the Danube, the annexation by the Hun Empire of almost the whole of Pannonia, free access for the Huns to the border towns, the organization of the International Fair in Nace, which has become the largest border town, the maintenance of the garrisons in the towns of Atheras and Arcadiopolis, situated near Constantinople, immediate delivery of all the Huns' defectors, including the mercenaries in the Eastern Roman armies, ban for the Romans to deal with agriculture and commerce in the territories occupied by the Huns without the permission of the Hun administration. The ambassadors of Constantinople, sent to the Huns, must be the highest officials, preferably of consular rank. In case of non-satisfaction of its main requirements, Attila threatens to continue the war. After the emperor, the interpreter Vigilus, our legate, led the ambassadors to the prime minister. Edecon admires sincerely and expresses his astonishment at the magnificence of the imperial palace and often stops at works of art, sculptures, gold ornaments and gemstone decorations. He even declares that he envies the Romans living in such luxury. Vigilus discreetly whispers his observations in Chrysaphius's ear at the beginning of the encounter. The great eunuch immediately ripens the idea, natural to him, of the corruption of General Hun and the organization of an attempt on the life of Attila. First, he does a slight allusion. Edecon seems interested in this proposal. The Grand Eunuch, during a confidential meeting, continues the seduction of the Hun with arguments, in his opinion, irresistible for a barbarian. I see that you are a person created for another life than in the wooden houses or the steppe yurts. You have the feeling of beauty. If Attila is eliminated, the recognition of our emperor will have no limit. You will live in a magnificent villa in Constantinople in wealth, luxury and honor. You can become a general of our army. Edecon accepts. Why not? We only live once. But I need guarantees. Chrysaphius, calm him. I shall arrange for you an encounter with the Emperor Theodosius, and he will confirm my promises. Satisfied. The Hun calms down and passes to the case. I demand 50 pounds of gold to pay the people necessary for this operation. The Grand Eunuch wants to give him this sum at once, but Edecon stops him. I cannot hide such a quantity of gold from my fellow travelers. Attila will soon learn that I am carrying gold and suspect me. What to do? Send your embassy with the answer to Attila. Make Vigilus the interpreter of this embassy, and it is he who will carry the gold. Chrysaphius rejoices. Excellent idea. I like you more and more. I have no doubt that our plan will be successful. After this discussion, the Prime Minister met Theodosius, who gladly approved the plan of the plot against Attila. Chrysaphius feels that the emperor was thinking a great deal about this means of liberating himself from a strong adversary, a means quite ordinary for the court of Constantinople. Soon Chrysaphius secretly leads Edecon to the emperor, who pronounced the words, expected by the Hun. I guarantee all that my faithful Prime Minister, the great eunuch Chrysaphius, has promised you. Chrysaphius decided to kill at the same time as Attila another person who was bothering him. It was Maximin, an influential, noble and honest count. Naturally, the count and the great eunuch did not sympathize. Chrysaphius decided to send him as ambassador to Attila, hoping that Attila would be killed and that the Huns would avenge the death of their emperor, executing Maximin. The great eunuch was pleased with this idea and with himself. It was his most astute combination, and he was surely a great genius. Maximin is summoned to the emperor, who seems confused and met with these words, "My dear Maximin, I shall be very sincere with you. I must save my honor and reputation, the honor of our great empire, before this barbarian Attila who wants to humiliate us after his victories. I am obliged to yield to his principal demands, but you are able to resist with dignity and skill with his pressure and, perhaps, to moderate his demands. We must do everything so that this agreement is perceived as a treaty between two equal empires in order to hide as much as possible the extent of our defeat." The Count is touched by these words of his intellectual and religious emperor, humiliated by this cruel Attila, chief of the army of savage barbarians thinking only of pillage and murder. He asks to be accompanied by Priscos, a Greek intellectual who will be useful to the embassy. The inhabitants of Constantinople do not know whether the armistice will last. That is why the rumor about the departure of the embassy of Maximin spreads quickly and brings hope to the discouraged people. Priscos is approached by a young Gaul, My name is Rustic. My father Attilius is a publisher in Lyon. In his youth, he knew Attila, who was doing his studies in Italy at that time. He formed a friendship with Wonges, whom we visited a few years ago in the capital of the Huns. The Greek is astonished. What are you doing at Constantinople? I want to write a book about this war. But now I ask you to leave with your embassy to describe your negotiations. But I am charged myself to write the diary of the embassy. Perfect. In this case, can you authorize us to edit your book written on the basis of this journal? I am a beginner writer. Why not? Everyone is now interested in the Huns, as far as I am concerned. I would like to stay some time in the capital of the Huns, and perhaps enter the service of their government, and then calmly write my own book. I suppose that to work in their government one must speak their language. I speak Goth and Hun. How did you learn? My father speaks these languages. Then there are many Goths and Huns mercenaries in Gaul. It's very interesting. I think Count Maximin will accept your request. Comes the day of the last audience of the Emperor Theodosius with the Hun ambassadors. Orestes, to whom Edecon has related everything, smiles. Seeing that the reassured monarch is looking very haughty and important, his remarks in the eyes of the Hun ambassadors are insufficiently respectful of Attila. Orestes demands dryly, should we waste time for useless embassies and long negotiations? I'm afraid you just want to save time. We do not understand. Does the Emperor of the East really want to settle all questions quickly as Emperor Attila wants? Theodosius instantly loses all his greatness and says with an undisguised anger, how dare you tell me that I only want to save time? Maybe, is it your emperor who wants to save time by presenting me such claims? I completely agree to immediately stop the long and tiring discussions by submitting to the decision of an honest arbiter. You may choose as your arbitrator your minister Wonges, who is a civilized and honest person, with a good understanding of international reality and capable of thinking about the future. Just get your master's agreement and everything will be settled. Tell him that I will agree with any decision of Wonges. Your emperor might promise to do the same. All are shocked by this absurd proposal. Perfect, thinks Edecon. Wonges will decide everything to our advantage. Orestes thinks, and this insignificance governs the empire. For Attila it makes no sense to organize an attack against him. May God give poor Theodosius several years of life. Maximin and Chrysaphius are unanimous. Our poor emperor remains a child in spite of his 48 years. The count thinks of it with deep regret, and the great eunuch is very satisfied. Soon Theodosius signs his letter to Attila, where he expresses his agreement to yield Pannonia and extradite the defectors, accepts that his ambassadors should be high-ranking statesmen. For the neutrality of the region of Nace in order to organize each year of the international fair, for the maintenance of the mixed garrisons in the fortresses north of Constantinople, and the preservation of the garrison at Atheras, to set up a joint commission on the demarcation of the new frontier, to set up a permanent joint committee to deal with questions relating to the travel and activities of the Romans and the Huns outside their new frontiers, for the transmission of Roman and Hun proposals to the arbitration of Wonges with the obligations to submit to its decision. Besides this letter, sealed by the imperial seal, the embassy of Maximin transports 17 Hun deserters chained, not far from Constantinople, at Atheras. The Romans is awaited by the Huns warriors who were to accompany them to the capital of Attila.